This afternoon, we are honored to have with us Madam Odile Basso, President of the European Bank for Construction and Development. Distinguished delegates, it is now my pleasure to invite the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Climate Change Convention, Simon Steele, to address the plenary. Executive Secretary, you have the floor.
Good evening all. If you could take your seats, please. If you could take your seats, please. Thank you. Excellencies, esteemed delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to address you as Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, an international body created 30 years ago by the collective decisions of all the nations represented at this conference. Much has been achieved over the past 3 decades to address the climate crisis. The Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, countless successive decisions and mandates up to the Glasgow Climate Pact, with the completion of the Paris Rulebook and a clear and balanced set of mandates. But it is my business mind. Proof of progress sits in balance sheets, profit and loss tables, and tangible outcomes. Setting goals and making pledges is nice, but they're useless if they don't come to life. In 2019, global greenhouse gas emissions were 50% higher than in 1990. Without immediate and significant emissions reductions across all sectors, along with adequate support for implementation, it will be impossible to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees or build the necessary resilience to protect societies across the world. Each leader that speaks here today needs to do 3 things. 1, as soon as you finish your intervention, sit down with your team here on the ground and ensure your negotiators know you expect complete consistency between the vision in your address and the positions taken in the meeting rooms. 2, as soon as you touch down back from Sharm el-Sheikh, send an email to your cabinet with the subject line, "How are we strengthening our climate plans this year? Are we on track for implementing them over the next 8 years? This responsibility is in your hands. We need to see rapid action addressing mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, finance, and accountability. Change is starting to happen. Policies, regulations, and market instruments are proven effective in many countries, but they need to be scaled up and duly supported and applied more widely and equitably. 3, between the time you rise in the mornings and retire in the evenings, ensure your decisions and your actions reflect the level of urgency of the current crisis, the gravity of the threats we're facing, and the shortness of the time we have remaining to avoid the devastating consequences of runaway climate change. This is the only realistic way to protect the world's greatest global public good, the climate, for our generation and for those generations to come. I thank you.
I would like to thank Simon for his statement. It is now my distinct pleasure to invite Ms. Odile Renaud-Basso, President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, to address the plenary. Ms. Renaud-Basso, you have the floor.
Thank you, President, and congratulations, Simon, on your appointment and on your first COP as Executive Secretary. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am speaking to you today on behalf of the multilateral development banks in the EBRD's capacity as chair of the MDBs Climate Action Group. Massive wildfires, huge floods, burning heat waves are becoming more frequent, more extreme, and more destructive. Global action to reduce emissions is even more urgent. But just as important is action to adapt to the impact of climate change. As the UN Environment Programme told us only last week, developing countries need 5 to 10 times more finance to close the widening gap of financing adaptation. Meeting these twin demands of mitigation and adaptation is vital to meet the world's development goals, which is to deliver inclusive, sustainable economic growth. MDBs are determined to play their part in accelerating the transition to a resilient net zero world. Yesterday, we released a joint statement setting out our collective ambition to address the climate crisis. And allow me to highlight here today with you our core messages. First, the MDBs systems is the climate finance largest single delivery channel. In 2021, we provided more climate finance than ever before. Together, the MDBs delivered $51 billion to low and middle-income economies, of which more than $17 billion was for adaptation. Just as importantly, the MDBs collectively mobilized $41 billion of private climate finance. But our activity goes well beyond finance, and this is my second message. Creating environments that will generate green investments is at the core of what we do. We will step up support for countries and cities and their long-term planning and help them prepare high-impact projects and programs to realize transformational results. And we will mobilize financing from both public and private sources. We will increase our support for clients so that they can better understand climate risks and build resilient, low-carbon and inclusive infrastructures, cities and businesses. We will help countries to make the most of the economic opportunities this transition brings. And we will increasingly integrate our efforts to address the climate crisis with a growing focus on nature and biodiversity loss. We know that there is much more to be done. MDBs are only part of the solution to the climate crisis. But we, MDBs, are strongly committed to supporting you in your implementation of the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Climate Pact. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Ms. Renaud Basso for her statement. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of the opening of the first part of the high-level segment. Please remain in your seats to allow our guests to leave the podium before we begin the delivery of national statements. I wish to bid farewell to Ms. Rano Bazo as she leaves the podium and then proceed. Distinguished delegates, honored guests, today heads of states and government will deliver national statements. I would like to remind our distinguished speakers of actions in place to ensure effective time management. There is a 3-minute time limit for statements during the high-level segment. Statements should be as concise as possible, noting that the full of the official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. And finally, please note that heads of state or government who are not in the plenary at the time of the delivery of their statements will be scheduled to speak at the end of all the statements in that category. Distinguished honored guests, the Egyptian presidency is delighted to receive over 100 heads of state and government. Your presence here is a testament to the commitment of your country's willingness to take meaningful and tangible steps to address the climate crisis and implement the Paris Agreement. It is essential that we expedite efforts towards implementing climate action. With political will and commitment, we can and must deliver an outcome in Sharm el-Sheikh the world can be proud of. Let us begin. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of Congo. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Président de la République arabe d'Égypte, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, Monsieur le Secrétaire général des Nations Unies, Mesdames et Messieurs, je saisis cette opportunité pour réaffirmer la ferme volonté et la détermination de la République du Congo à participer activement à l'effort mondial de la lutte contre les changements climatiques. Sans la moindre hésitation, j'apporte mon soutien au président désigné de cette COP 27, qui est sans doute
decisive. This is one of the most decisive conferences since the signing of the Paris Accords in 2015. COP27 must be a COP for action. After so many declarations made over the years, so many Promises unkept. The time has come to move to tangible acts. At stake is our credibility. Ladies and gentlemen, the crucial survival of humanity means that we must respect without hesitation as commitments assumed and the implementation of effective initiatives in line with preserving the environment. In the face of climate disruptions, reforesting the planet are, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most relevant solutions available. With forest cover estimated at 220 million hectares, or 6% of forest coverage of the planet and 10% of global biodiversity, the Congo Basin is the second most dense tropical forest and region after the Amazon. Studies estimate that it is perhaps the last biggest land-based carbon sink in the world, giving crucial importance to its forests in the global struggle against climate change. The Congo Basin alone captures more than 30 billion tons of CO2, or that's the equivalent of 3 years of total emissions by all our countries. In that respect, preserving and protecting our forests has become an urgent commitment that we must all rise to. We must all make a decisive political decision and express our solidarity with the rest of humanity. It should be reiterated that the Republic of Congo very early on became aware of the vital need to protect, to rebuild and extend its forest coverage. For 40 years now, our whole population has been urged to plant a tree as part of National Day of the Tree, celebrated in our country on the 6th of November every year. It's this kind of action, this kind of voluntary action, coupled with a rigorous forest coverage that has enabled us to hold one of the lowest levels of deforestation in the world. In other words, this COP is opening on a symbolic date. Yesterday, before leaving my country, I, together with all of the Congolese people, I carried out my citizen's duty to plant a tree. That duty of universal scope reflects the great awareness of the population, whose role has proven beyond doubt in combating climate change. With regards to this very positive experience in the Republic of Congo, and to achieve a safer, surer world at an environmental and climate level. Speaking from this podium, I launch an urgent plea to establish a decade of forestation that would oblige humanity to reverse the current course of destruction of our forests. What's more, not more than just a solution, it's an absolute imperative, because forests, the need to preserve forests is a cause that we must all support. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Majesty King Abdullah II Ibn Al Hussein, King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Your Majesty, you have the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful. My brother, Mr. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi.
My friends, يسرني في البداية.
At the outset, it is my pleasure to thank my brother, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and the people and the government of the Arab Republic of Egypt for their warm welcome and for hosting this important global summit.
30 years of progress in the fight against climate change. Consensus has grown, goals have been set, yet the lethal dangers have been growing even faster. Every country is paying the price, and especially so in the developing world. COP27 now has an urgent task: to kickstart a new level of climate action, transformative action that can achieve tangible results faster and more effectively. This is Jordan's commitment. Climate change is no stranger to us. We share similar climate threats with the entire region. Our rainfall average has dropped by almost half its levels over the past 5 decades, while the water share per capita fell by nearly 80%. The Dead Sea water levels are declining by 3 feet per year. Just around 7% of the water now flows in the Jordan River, compared to its historic average. Oases with rich biodiversity have disappeared within a few decades, while climate change and zero-sum policies are raising concerns for the future of the Nile and the historic rivers of Mesopotamia. In Jordan's case, rising temperatures and water scarcity have put heavy pressure on our limited resources, resources strained further by unnatural population growth driven by the massive influx of refugees. The UN has recognized that global refugees and their hosts are among the most vulnerable to climate change. So to address this crisis, Jordan has put forward a climate refugee nexus initiative. It will prioritize support for host countries that bear the brunt of climate change. And I hope you will join us in endorsing this initiative. My friends, destructive climate change does not have to define our future. Today we have more expert knowledge, better practical tools, and more targeted approaches than ever before. The opportunities are immense, if we will grasp them. Let me briefly touch on 2 important drivers of success. First is close integration between climate change action and economic development. This holistic approach reflects a basic reality in the 21st century. Sustainable economic development requires green resources and practices, and in turn, a greener world must provide for the aspirations of the world's people. We are starting to find solutions in renewable energy, water desalination, advanced irrigation technologies, and shifting to electric modes of transportation. Today, Jordan's Green Recovery Program goes hand in hand with our economic modernization vision. We are making the most of our country's significant solar and wind resources. Jordan is a leader in the region in clean energy production, with 29% of electricity powered by renewables, and we plan to reach 50% by 2030. In the meantime, Jordan has boosted our contribution to greenhouse gas reduction to double our 2030 goal. And across our economy, green-focused partnerships are set to create new jobs for a future of hope. And this brings me to a second driver of successful climate action: strong collaboration at the global and regional levels, as well as between public and private sectors, in order to target opportunities and match up resources and capabilities. And one critical area is financing for developing countries to mitigate climate damage and adapt to its impact. Jordan, with a track record of successful climate-responsive projects, is keen to serve as a regional hub for green growth. We are working in partnership with Egypt, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and others to strengthen our entire region. In Jordan itself, we offer a wide array of opportunities for investment in climate-smart initiatives, green infrastructure, electric mobility, agriculture, and other sectors. We have joined with the UAE in Project Prosperity that will expand clean energy and water. Another innovative project is taking place at Aqaba's Marine Nature Reserve, where we and international partners will be helping find solutions to ocean climate crises far beyond our shores. And let me mention one more cause close to Jordan's heart: the urgent call to save World Heritage sites endangered by climate change. The Dead Sea and the sacred Jordan River are treasures of the past and legacies for our future. Our generation must not be the broken link. My friends, good or bad, the world's climate is indivisible. So must we be. In the fight for life on Earth, no one is a bystander. Every contribution counts. COP27 has brought us together to link forces and stand our ground. We are at the beginning of a long, challenging, and urgent transformation. There may be difficult choices to make, but we need to make them while we can. So let's do so together as a region and as an international community, and achieve the green, resilient, and just world our people deserve. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Your Majesty, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Ali Bongo Ndimba, President of Gabon. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellences,
Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, allow me at the outset to thank sincerely my very dear brother, His Excellency Mr. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, for the successful organization of this 27th Conference of Parties on Climate Change. 1 year after Glasgow and just a few weeks away from the COP on biodiversity, COP27 is being held at a crucial moment for the future of our planet. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in Glasgow, we took stock of the significant gap between our actions and our commitments, and here is where we must rectify that gap. As to the crucial question of financing climate action, 13 years after Copenhagen, it is now high time to see us abide by our promise to support the climate policies of developing countries, and this to the tune of $100 billion annually. By way of example, the Republic of Gabon, like many other developing countries, should be able to receive several hundred millions of dollars as an outcome of this promise. This is to finance our adaptation to climate change and our just energy and economic transition, and also to reward our efforts towards net carbon sequestration. This financing must be transparent, effective, and more importantly, operational. Unfortunately, the reality on the ground is a far cry from this, and Africa is now spending up to 9% of its GDP to tackle climate change. This question came up for debate in Gabon, and as part of the African Week on Climate, African Climate Week, which brought together almost 2,500 participants, and today I am the spokesperson for this effort.
the Gabonese Republic sits on the equator, on the west coast of Africa. The tropical rainforests of the Ogooué Basin cover 88% of our country. As a result of 5 decades of strong forest governance, our deforestation rate has constantly remained well below 0.5%, and we are probably the most net carbon positive country on Earth. Since I made a strong commitment to fighting climate change in Copenhagen, we have absorbed almost 1.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. As stated in our second NDC, Gabon has committed to remain carbon neutral beyond 2050. In addition, subject to investment in our forests and appropriate carbon payments, we hope to continue absorbing over 100 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. We are part of the Congo-Ogooué Basin, often referred to as the second lung of the planet. The Congo-Ogooué Basin stores almost 10 years of global carbon emissions. Our forests are proving more resilient to climate change than the other great forest basins, which makes us the healthier lung in the planet. Despite Gabon's high forest low deforestation status, over the last decade, we have reduced our forest carbon emissions by 90 million tons, resulting in the recent validation by the UNFCCC of our REDD+ credit. This makes Gabon one of the Red Plus pioneers in Africa, and was evident during the Africa Climate Week that the eyes of the continent, and indeed the developing world, are focused on the efforts to commercialize these credits. If we are successful, it will encourage other nations to issue sovereign rate plus credits, creating the enabling conditions for us to build on the modest voluntary forest carbon markets and capitalize on the potential of nature to join us in the fight against climate change. This will be a main theme during the One Forest Summit that I plan to co-host with President Macron in Libreville in March next year. If every nation focuses on its ability to fight climate change by reducing industrial emissions, optimizing its agriculture, technological innovation, and harnessing the potential of our ecosystems to absorb blue and green carbon, just as we did with COVID-19, we can come together and find solutions rather than differences. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Wave John Charles Ramcloan, President of Seychelles. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Just a second. First of all, may I, on behalf of the people of Seychelles, express our support and solidarity with all nations that have experienced the terrible effects of climate change lately. We stand by you as you mourn those who have disappeared and as you rebuild your towns and villages. Many, especially our youth, are asking whether COP is a counting game. 26, 27, 28, or whether it is a real countdown to saving our planet. My wish and prayer is that we leave Sharm el-Sheikh, the city of peace, with a peace pact with our planet, that we make good decisions and pledges that will be followed by concrete actions instead of another set of promises that take too long to materialize. Like other islands, our contribution in the destruction of the planet is minimal, yet we suffer the most. For example, the carbon emissions of Seychelles are very low, and we clean up our CO2 plus that of the world through our mangroves and seagrass meadows, making us a zero contributor to the destruction of the planet. And yet, our islands are disappearing and our coasts are being destroyed. It is an honor for me to stand here in Egypt at COP27 to announce that in 2023, Seychelles will further contribute in mitigation by moving to 100% protection of all its mangroves and seagrass meadows, adding to the already 32% protection of our ocean and 50% of our landmass. We insist that the Multi-Vulnerability Index, the MVI, should be the new order. Seeds are vulnerable, and we need access to concessionary funding in order to defend ourselves against climate change while fulfilling the SDGs to give our people a better life. Industrialized nations and multinationals must pay greater attention to the loss and damage agenda. We, the oceanic states that suffer the harsh effects of your activities, have to be assisted in repairing the damage you caused to us. Seychelles is playing a leadership role in adaptation and mitigation. We are building strong partnerships, however small we are. This year, we welcome the Ocean Race Summit to discuss the urgency of saving our one ocean. Later, we offered the venue for the first European Blue Invest Forum outside Europe to put emphasis on financing the blue economy. And late last month, we welcomed Prince Albert of Monaco and the Monaco Research Expedition in the search of resilient corals. And of course, we are also active in promoting the Great Blue Wall project. Seychelles remains a serious partner on whom the world can count on in the protection of the planet. My call is for us to be very good partners. Let us give our youth a better planet, and may we leave Egypt with enhanced hope and commitment to save our one and only blue planet. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Klaus Werner Lohannis, President of Romania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the times we live in are the most challenging in a generation. We face a war on the European continent with global effects, energy insecurity, food shortages, and economic instability. These should not divert our attention from climate change. On the contrary, delivering on climate is key to addressing many of these challenges and safeguarding the well-being of present and future generations. Climate change is not an abstract concept, but a daily reality with consequences on human health, nature, and the economy. My country, Romania, experienced this year severe drought with negative implications regarding access to water, food production, and power generation. Therefore, adaptation efforts are crucial to increase the resilience of societies and ecosystems facing climate risks. Ladies and gentlemen, Romania fully supports the European Union leadership on climate change and our joint commitment to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions. We must ensure an orderly green transition with multiple benefits: investments in research, development, innovation, development of the green economy, and job creation. Furthermore, energy access at affordable prices can be secured through investment in low-carbon energy, resilient networks, and adequate regulation for renewables. The costs of climate inaction exceeds by far the cost of action. Climate change generates economic and non-economic loss and damage across the world. Fellow leaders, our strongest allies in the fight against climate change are our citizens. We need to prepare and empower them for this battle. The youth in Romania is very motivated to act on climate change, and this dedication should serve as an inspiration to all of us. I strongly believe in the power of education to generate climate-friendly behavior. Education and research systems need to be better aligned with climate goals and equip our citizens, particularly our youth, with the skills needed in a low-carbon economy and society. I look forward to a comprehensive COP27 outcome. Let me conclude by kindly inviting you to work together on this with determination and dedication. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Sheikh El Ghazouin, President of Mauritania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد الرئيس.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Excellencies. President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Majesty, Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure, first of all, to congratulate His Excellency Abdel Fattah Sisi, the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, kindred country, for his country's welcome to the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, the magnificent city of Sharm el-Sheikh, which is hosting the 27th Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC. And to thank him for the very rigorous organization of this summit. We want to extend our thanks to the Egyptian people and government for their outstanding welcome and hospitality. I would also like to extend our thanks and gratitude to Mr. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, and his colleagues for their efforts to mobilize and coordinate international efforts to address the various environmental challenges we face. Ladies and gentlemen, today we do not need to speak at length to diagnose the disastrous and environmental situation of our planet and its destructive consequences at an economic and social level. And the fact that this constitutes a looming danger to planet Earth and life in Earth in general. All these things are crystal clear and can be seen in all aspects of life. Therefore, and today the big question is, and it's an absolute urgency, is to take necessary measures to halt this environmental deterioration parallel with efforts to combat the multidimensional adverse effects. And among the strategies adopted today to combat environmental degradation is building means of development that are less carbon dependent and moving fully towards alternative renewable energies to ensure the success of sustainable environmental transition. Now, it is true that the environmental burden is clearly imbalanced. The developing countries contribute with very low levels of greenhouse gas emissions. Yet those same countries bear the brunt of climate change arising from those greenhouse effects. And yet these countries are going to remarkable lengths to mitigate its impact, to mitigate their emissions and mitigate the negative impact of climate change. We in the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, as can be seen through our NDCs, which was updated during the Glasgow summit, reduced its CO2 emissions by 11%. And we've increased the share of renewable energies in our overall consumption by 50%. That will reach 50% by 2030. Those efforts have been sustained through a long-standing program moving towards the path of green hydrogen. In so doing, our country will create alternative, sustainable source of clean energy. In view of the significant environmental value of this project, we urge all technical partners and financial partners to contribute to its implementation. Allied to those efforts to promote new energies that cover 40% of all energies used, our country is pursuing its struggle against desertification through the Great Green Wall Initiative and the Committee to Combat Droughts in the Sahel. And along those lines, I call for greater support to the Africa Environment Committee in view of its contribution to achieving the 2063 agenda, because there's much hope that lies with that committee. And parallel to all of this, we're going to great lengths to support our citizens, to help them increase their resilience to the adverse impacts of climate change and deal with poverty and instability by promoting the rural sector and improving access to key services. Ladies and gentlemen, inaction in the face of huge environmental challenges will be costly at all levels. The onus is on us all to commit to new efforts at a collective and individual level to enable the anticipated environmental transition where we can support each other in the face of economic and social impacts, serious impacts that stem from climate change. We renew our call to our partners to step up their assistance to developing countries and to follow up on their financing pledges. I wish the summit every success, and I want to congratulate also our brothers in the United Arab Emirates for agreeing to host next year's COP, COP28. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Emmanuel Macron, President of France. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Bonsoir.
Good evening, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, Mr. Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, my dear friends. First of all, let me say how pleased I am to see you here again, and let me congratulate President El-Sisi on his successful organization of this COP, which is at once an African summit, a justice COP, and an implementation COP, which several people have said, and we will work with him, and we are grateful to him for this hospitality. We're here a year after Glasgow, where together we scaled up our ambitions, and where we took stock of the progress made, but we also took several steps. And everything that was said in Glasgow remains and should remain valid, because even though our world is no longer the same, the climate can not be an adjustable variable depending on the war waged by Russia on Ukrainian soil. In fact, Russia's aggression against Ukraine not only has brought the war to the European soil, but it has also plunged the world into a serious period of uncertainty, energy tension, food tensions, and difficulty upon difficulty, especially for many countries on the African continent and around the Mediterranean. And indeed, this crisis coming just a few months after the pandemic is yet another crisis, and which would lead many to say we have many other priorities and probably the climate should wait. But at the same time, we see many of our states being affected by the very consequences of this unraveling of the climate. And we must show once again that the climate urgency is well and truly here. It is not one that will come tomorrow. And so we have obligations. We have an obligation to continue to take action on the mitigation front, on the adaptation front, to prepare for crises and to repair those crises that have already taken place, and also try to deal with the shocks and the return of war and the consequences on our soil. And in order to do so, after the heads of state and government who have spoken before me and before a few others, let me say a few simple things. The first thing is we will not sacrifice our climate commitments faced with the energy threat from Russia. Therefore, the commitments undertaken by countries must be delivered upon. And for the rich countries, especially European countries, including France, this was the deposit of our national strategies. Now we must abide by them. This is a line of action which is Fit for 55. This is a European plan to reduce our emissions by 55% by 2030. And really, this should be based on energy sobriety, based on accelerated development of renewable energies and solutions that will help us to sustainably transition from fossil fuels and from nuclear energy. So therefore, this is a comprehensive energy undertaking, and we will change tax so that we can transition away from these fuels. The second key element is that we must continue to work on the mitigation front, and we must transition our economies away from coal, which is a strategy that is for all rich countries, but we must also help emerging countries to do so as quickly as possible. And this is something we must succeed in together under the Paris Agreement. So we must stay on course with this strategy, and that's why I am particularly keen on what we launched in Glasgow together. That is the JETP partnership, which helps us to plan this partnership for the biggest consumers, and this is a key component of this mitigation strategy. We took a first major step forward with South Africa, and France will invest $1 billion euros in this effort, and to transition away from coal in South Africa, which will be based on nuclear renewables and other efforts to transition away from coal. And we will scale this up. This is what we're doing with Indonesia, with India, and Senegal. But it is true that we must take this even further and faster. Energy revolution is possible, and this will need a strategy along with the emerging countries. And this is a strategy we are embarking on with several other countries, and the ambition level in India is high, Rwanda and other countries as well. And these are truly accelerated renewable strategies that we will continue to strongly support. Because here, once again, renewable energies are less expensive and more safe and less carbon-based than others, and it is in this context where we're seeing their relevance all the more. The third major message that I would like to convey here is that basically we must not forget that this battle for the climate and against the climate change is inextricably linked to the battle and fight for biodiversity. They are twin battles. And I said this before the main meeting in Montreal, and I said this before other meetings in 2021 on this. We know that nature is our best ally to achieve the Paris targets. They're the two sides of the same coin, and it also shows that those countries that are often seen as the most poor are the solutions to fighting against climate change. Those countries that have biodiversity reserves, whether marine or land-based, have incalculable carbon resources and deposits, and we must therefore help them to bring these nature-based solutions to the fore. And I'm thinking in particular of the critical ecosystems, ancient forests, peat bogs, wetlands, and mangroves, which have the greatest carbon stocks and the most biodiversity. If these ecosystems are destroyed, vast carbon reserves will be released and annihilate any chances of achieving our goal. There are more than already 100 countries to have a 30% protection target, an initiative that we launched in early 2021 and which we are carrying forward with Costa Rica. And I'm hoping that COP15 on biodiversity will confirm this decision and take us even further. We must therefore urgently recognize these ecosystems as having a particular status and propose to those states hosting them to have political and financial partnerships in place to help them preserve them. So we must look at the flows, but we must also support those countries to help them to preserve these biodiversity treasures. And it's for this reason that this morning we launched, along with several states present in the room, Colombia, Gabon, Rwanda, and several representatives of indigenous peoples and the Philippines, China, the United States, and the Europeans, we launched an initiative to do what we're working with the emitters under JETP and to set up a positive preservation program and to come up with country-by-country contracts, partnerships, working with NGOs, especially Conservation International, and to come up with a method that will enable us to finance the preservation of these places, these spaces, and partnerships that will come up with legal, political, and financial tools to preserve these ecosystems. We came up with initiatives for these contracts this morning, and Gabon, Colombia, and the Philippines have already signed on, and we will be in Libreville in early 2023 to come up with concrete action plans in the One Forest initiative that was just mentioned by President Ali Bongo just now. This is the same type of initiative that will be undertaken to protect oceans with insight the 2025 United Nations Conference. The ocean must be a new frontier for cooperation and multilateralism. So once again, we must do our utmost to preserve climate and biodiversity initiatives. And let me be clear, France will be spearheading these commitments, and that is the reason why we are supporting the prohibition of any seabed exploitation. I would like to confirm this position, and I will do so in other international fora. This morning, we also launched a high-level group to come up with a methodology for biodiversity credits and to also looking ahead to the first quarter of 2023 to have a common method in place. And the last and fourth point was climate justice. We have undertaken commitments, and today we have every confidence. The confidence is actually frittering away between global north and global south. And what I said a few weeks ago in the United Nations, we have to avoid this division in the world on the war and on the climate as well. We've heard many countries talk about the 100 billion since Copenhagen that has not yet come in. We must really come to terms with this concept of financial solidarity. We have 4 billion already committed, and move towards 100 billion and make sure that those who have committed to disburse the monies and to find bilateral or multilateral mechanisms to make sure that they step up to their commitments to deliver this money so it is delivered to the global south. Otherwise, we will lose the confidence of the global south. And therefore, very quickly, the 100 billion will be achieved. We're already at 82, but we need to do much more to deliver fully. We must also have solidarity around adaptation. France has been investing 6 billion each year, which is the fair share of this agreement since Paris. And we also dedicate 2 million of that to adaptation. So all developed countries, rich countries, must deliver on their commitments, and I will be speaking to my colleagues from such countries to make sure that we overcome the political obstacles. And I want to hail many of the leaders in this world who are working valiantly to overcome these political hurdles. Beyond these figures, we must have specific actions in place with the most affected areas and come up with partnerships that deliver this justice. And this is what we wanted to do with the Great Green Wall in the Sahel. And this is yielding results. We saw a record number of pledges with almost 19 billion euros, but last year we disbursed 2.5 billion euros on the ground with projects that will help us both to mitigate climate change and adapt to it, and also to reforest and tackle desertification. So this is a chance for us to deal with climate, biodiversity, and also provide economic opportunities to the most fragile countries by providing them with the opportunity to achieve food sovereignty and to do this through the vegetable protein supply chains. We also have initiatives to come up with more effective partnerships with NGOs on the ground and to tackle this issue of climate justice. But today, we must go beyond the 100 billion and the other initiatives on the ground. And let me close with this. We need a huge financial shock of concessional financing. There's this whole issue of loss and damage. And here I wish to welcome the courage and strength of many African, Caribbean, Pacific, and Latin American leaders who have been carrying this debate. And they're saying, you can't talk about the past because there was always justice, but no, we want to talk to you about the future. And they have every right to say so, because not only do we have we not emitted as much as you in the past, but you also prevented us from developing as we wish to do. But we will be affected by the consequences of what usually happens to us more quickly than it does to you, because we are more vulnerable. We have coastal states that are more affected because we have geographic realities that make us more fragile and vulnerable than you, and they have every right to say so. This is a just and debate. So all countries, some of them in an intermediary position, some of them are emergent, some are poor, and they underwent a shock that asymmetrically affected the whole world. And we're doing exceptional things. We have mobilized exceptional financing, and they're saying, but what is happening to us is exceptional. No more water under our soils, or no more groundwater, etc. And now we can no longer do business as usual, and they have every right to say so. So we must make a sea change, move the needle on this. We were already behind, and we're even more behind now. So we must ensure that we are dealing with the issue of SDRs and providing the 100 billion to the poorest countries. So we're dealing with the climate, and in the G20, we will move from 30% and work with those who have not yet delivered on their commitments. But we will also, we launched an initiative with Mia Mottley of Barbados, and I wanted to welcome her force of character and what she has brought to this debate. And we have set up a group of wise minds at the highest level to come up with climate financing solutions. So next spring, not in another year or 2 years, next spring, we called on the IMF, the World Bank, and the OECD to come up with concrete solutions to activate these innovative financing solutions and to help us to provide access to new liquidities, to have a new start for countries, including MICs, who are affected by these shocks, and together to make sure that we can have solutions that take into account the climate vulnerability of many countries, and to mobilize exceptional financing, private, as well as public and private, but more importantly, all together we must change the rules of our major international banks, the development banks, the IMF and the World Bank, and our major lenders, and say that what you're asking of us in terms of debt, reimbursement and guarantees, when we are affected by a climate shock, when we are a victim of a climate accident, to some degree there must be a suspension of those conditions, and those must be taken into account. So with emerging countries, developing countries, and MICs, we will be continuing this work to completely change and shift our thinking on this. Otherwise, it will be too late. So this is in partnership with the Prime Minister of Barbados, and we are embarking on this initiative to ensure that next spring, we will have these proposals, and we will see a proposed changing of those rules and the provisions. And in the spring meetings of the World Bank and IMF and the major lenders, that will be a practical step. We can't wait for the next COP. That will be too long. I have taken too long, and I must apologize, but we have begun. But let us not slow down, because all these successive crises are saying the same thing to us. The injustices in today's world are unsustainable. I cannot be tolerated any longer, and the crises are aggravating these injustices. We can only emerge from this by rethinking how we can act in solidarity in the private and public spheres. This is what must change, nothing else. And it is for this reason that this African COP, hosted by Egypt, whom I'd like to thank once again, will enable us to do so. Thank you to everyone.
Merci, Madame Présidente.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement, and thank you for the apology. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania. Madam President, you have the floor.
Your Excellency the President, Excellencies, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, Sisi, thank you for convening us and for a timely theme, delivering for people and the planet. What an opportune time to meet right after the COVID-19 pandemic. A time to reflect on COVID-19 effects to nature, people, and prosperity. Along with the pandemic came lessons, opportunities, and a powerful reminder of the nexus between environmental health and human health. A reminder to build back better and sustainably by retracking our footprints towards green transition. Our yesterday's inaction should not be our today's excuse, because science has unfolded the scale of this planetary crisis in its effects to vulnerable communities and our course of action. The COVID-19 lockdowns gave us a stepping stone towards the right path. This green path is sustainable through transformed and modernized industry and infrastructure, accelerated economic diversification and competitiveness, and strengthened resilience. Excellencies, science has shown a direct correlation between human prosperity and environmental prosperity. Nature-based economy can be our reality if only we have a shared vision and leverage opportunities that deliver real and structural changes. We are in Sharm el-Sheikh, a city in a continent whose economy relies explicitly on natural resources, a continent where millions of its vulnerable communities are grappling with poor public health, greenhouse gas emissions, and loss of livelihoods due to severe climatic effects. Delays on concrete actions to address loss and damage leaves us with no choice but to realign our meager financial resources to build a climate-resilient economy that ensures survival of the bigger segment of our population that depends on agriculture for livelihood, and to save the looming decline of our gross national product, of which agriculture accounts for a greater share. On another hand, inaction means risking our development agenda and prosperity. And thus, in this regard, we in Tanzania has in place the National Climate Change Response Strategy and the National Determined Contributions, which set targets of reducing greenhouse gases emissions economy-wide between 30 to 35% by 2030. With an estimated $19.2 billion as cost of implementation. Now the question is, how on earth the country like Tanzania raise this amount of money for mitigation and adaptation of the climate effects? Nevertheless, showing the political will Tanzania is continuing to construct and expand rapid transport networks that are expected to reduce more than 900 million tons of carbon generated each year. We are also determined to increase the use of renewable energy sources from 60% in 2015 to 80% in 2025. Tanzania also is committed to preserve 48 million hectares of forest, and this is about 55% of the total land area of the country. And on top of that, we are planting 200 million trees in every 3 years. All we are asking here is for an alignment of global carbon prices to help generate resources from these carbon sinks. Excellencies, this is the type of leadership exhibited by the developing countries that lack technological know-how, lacking financial and human capacities, having limited scientific information at our fingertips. Yet with these limitations, our part of the world is asked to choose life or death. The question is, do we have an option? Unless we do it together. And in this regard, we urge developed countries, especially the G20, to fulfill their commitments. We call upon effective implementation of technology transfer while unlocking climate finance to fund our national determined contributions. We are also urging the developed world to raise their subsequent NDCs ambitions to halt greenhouse gas emissions from crossing the irreversible tipping point of atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide. Having said that, Excellencies, I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Abdulatif M. Jamal Rashid, President of Iraq. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to greet His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, whom we support and we endorse his call to stop the war in Ukraine. We thank him for making this proposal. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Your Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Majesties, Excellencies, Highnesses, the heads of state and government, honorable ministers, distinguished attendees. Allow me to express my thanks and gratitude to our brothers in the Arab Republic of Egypt for their great hospitality and for their efforts to make this conference a success. COP27 is an important milestone in our efforts to address climate challenges and create proper responses to them. These responses have to be suitable to the changes that the climate is witnessing and also the implications on economy and health. In this context, we must say that the major challenge that we face in Iraq is the water crisis. It is astounding, actually, if we if we actually realize that the Mesopotamia is now water scarce after long ages during which floods were the main problem threatening the populations and agriculture and life. This crisis has prompted the Iraqi authorities to regulate the agricultural policies, and also this crisis is impacting the lives and livelihoods of the Iraqi society and all the Iraqi population, and also leads to the increase in desertification and other environmental and health impacts. The southern marshlands in Iraq were dried during the dictatorial eras. Then, after 2003, we tried to revitalize them, but again, they are facing the threat of drought because of the decreasing water tables in these areas. The crisis was compounded because of the low precipitation and drought during the recent years. Agriculture was harmed as a direct impact, and this actually compounded the desertification issue and also presented more threats to the agricultural wealth. The water authorities in Iraq have therefore worked with the Republic of Turkey and the Islamic Republic of Iran in order to distribute fair quotas of the waters of the rivers of Tigris and Euphrates and their tributaries. The marshlands actually constitute a main part of the history of human civilization. They have always been a contributor to maintaining biological balance, not only for Iraq but for the entire area. The exacerbating drought in our country is presenting a threat to the lives and the livelihoods of Iraqis and to the economy of our country. Green areas are declining a day after another. We still hope for more cooperation from the water authorities and the political authorities in our neighboring countries, especially Turkey. It was regrettable that many agricultural development plans were reversed because of the conditions of violence and terrorism. The occupation of some Iraqi cities and towns by Daesh has been one of the major challenges that affected the areas of orchards and fields. Desertification now threatens almost 40% of the area of our country, a country that once was one of the most fertile and productive countries in the region. Therefore, my dear brothers, majesties, highnesses, excellencies, we have to reinforce our efforts to limit desertification. This will be a major part of the agricultural policies and environmental policies of Iraq. We will work to expand green areas and revitalize the arid areas in our country in order to curb the environmental harms, including cross-border sand drift and other phenomena. We are also taking up the responsibility of regulating water policies and improving irrigation systems and limiting wastage. We are continuing our efforts in order to improve the productivity in the gas sector, where we are trying to seek a better investment of gas emissions, which contributes to conserving the environment. Our efforts may have been stalled because of our war on terror, but we still hold the responsibility of prompting to driving these efforts as much as we can. This is what we have been doing through the policies of our successive governments. We were one of the countries most affected by global warming. We are party to the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, and we have been suffering the negative impacts of global warming. We would like to express our support to the efforts of the international community to mitigate this phenomenon. Despite the terrorism and violence that we've been facing, we're trying to diversify the sources of economy and to also localize climate investment in all aspects of life. We're trying also to create an environment conducive to the concepts of green growth. In this context, we have presented clear-cut documents that prove that we will continue our measures to mobilize action and to set the necessary plans for this purpose. We hope to receive more international support to bolster our policies and to be able to set the policies and plans and strategies that lead to transition to renewable energies in order to conserve the environment and save the climate. The exchange of experiences between countries is necessary. International support and fair support of these efforts is also necessary. This is part of our responsibility towards posterity, because clean environments and sustainable water resources are necessary to all generations. And I reiterate my thanks and appreciation for the tireless efforts of Egypt, and also I wish all success to this conference that I hope would be an important step towards consolidating a partnership, effective partnership to save the climate of our planet. Peace and blessings be upon you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Suzanne Kaptuvo, President of Slovakia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year's extreme weather across the world reminds us that it's not just the next generations who will feel the impact of the climate crisis. For too long, we talk about the why and the how. Now it's time to act. We need an equal focus on adaptation to the changing climate conditions and on mitigating the negative impact of our actions on climate. While 90% of all emissions are already covered by the net zero target, we are still too far from a collective success. Global emissions continue to rise. It's not enough to have targets. We must turn them into concrete national steps that will lead us to net zero. By 2030, Slovakia will cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 55% compared to 2005 level. We are joining the Global Methane Pledge initiative, and we are starting the biggest decarbonization of our economy. This will reduce our industrial CO2 emissions by more than 40% by 2030. It's clear that the climate emergency will not wait until the current energy crisis is over. Short-sighted solutions, such as switching from gas to coal, will only speed up our planet's destruction. In Slovakia, we are sticking to the plan to close down coal power plants next year, despite the record energy prices. We must move faster towards clean energy and renewables, including geothermal. I'm glad that Slovakia's talents have developed solutions that will make the use of this energy possible anywhere, in the world. This is good for our climate, our planet, and of course, for our energy security. Green transition is neither easy nor cheap. It will often hit the most vulnerable. The most affected countries need more of our support to cope. Since the adoption of the Paris Climate Agreement, Slovakia's contribution to the green finance has grown almost fivefold. We mainstream climate measures in our development assistance in Europe, Asia, and Africa. In Kenya alone, we supported 16,000 farmers by planting 1 million cashew trees so their produce is local and sustainable. But governments alone won't address the climate crisis. Private and innovative financing must step in so everyone does their fair share. Excellencies, the climate emergency is here and now. The ocean levels are rising. We are losing biodiversity at record speed. The global food crisis, induced by the climate change and worsened by Russia's weaponization of grain exports, is forcing millions of people out of their homes. These crises demonstrate our collective fragility. Our bolder commitments, our better and faster delivery on our climate targets must make this scope a milestone. The milestone which will transform our collective fragility into our collective resilience. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement and particularly for helping us manage the time. May I appeal to Your Excellencies that we stick to the stipulated 3-minute slot as much as possible. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Faustin Archange Touadera, President of the Central African Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Excellencies, Mr. Abdel Fattah Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the heads of state and government, Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen. COP27, which brings us together in this beautiful city of Sharm el-Sheikh, gives us one last opportunity to assess our commitments towards our planet. Exceptional climate crises in recent years have had a sweeping, devastating impacts on the survival of all of humanity at an economic and social level, on the viability of the environment, on governance, on global peace and security. We should say it clearly, the rich countries, the top polluters, are the ones who are most to blame for endangering humanity. Africa, whose contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is negligible, less than 4%, should not continue to pay for crimes it hasn't committed, pursuant to their historic responsibilities for climate deteriorations. The rich countries should help the poor countries to implement their national voluntary reduction action plans. Ladies and gentlemen, as an underdeveloped country, the Central African Republic intends to exercise its permanent right of sovereignty over its natural resources to exploit its forests in the interests of national development and the well-being of its population. However, faithful to its international commitments and conscious of its responsibility in preserving the second largest forest cover of the world, a true environmental lung of the planet, my country pursues its efforts together with other countries around the Congo basin with a view to rational, sustainable exploitation of forest resources through implementation of management plans. However, sadly, the promise from Glasgow of 1.5 billion US dollars for countries around the Congo basin wasn't equally shared out to allow each country to create conditions for climate resilience and to foster low-carbon development. What's more, we demand immediate implementation of the promises made by developed countries, international organizations, and private sector to mobilize 100 billion US dollars per year to meet the priority needs of the developing countries. The CAR hereby reaffirms its commitment, its support of the shared African position and that of the G77 plus China on negotiating a new climate regime. It's a matter of taking into account financing of climate action, of doubling the envelope for adaptation decided on at COP26, and to leave this conference with a decision on financing loss and damage, as well as the necessary means to ensure implementation of our NDCs. From this podium, I appeal for you to remember the specific situation of Africa when it comes to combating climate change. That is the prerequisite for achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 and preventing the erosion of biodiversity and saving our planet. May God protect all of humanity. I thank you.
Merci. I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Filipe Jacinto Nyusi, President of Mozambique. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairperson of this session, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen, I have a singular privilege to address this COP27 debate on behalf of the Mozambicans and my government in a context of post-COVID-19 recovery and extreme weather events that undermine the global sustainable development agenda. I extend my greetings to all present, and I thank the people and government of the Arab Republic of Egypt for the warm hospitality and excellent facilities that have been accorded for this event. Mr. President, congratulations on your nomination. Mozambique is one of the countries most exposed to the risks of climate change, characterized by tropical cyclones, floods, and cyclical droughts that require more assertive adaptation and resilience measures. In 2022, the country hosted the regional conference that culminated in the Maputo Declaration on Sustainable and Integrated Management of the Miombo forests, which sets priorities for the next decade and reinforces the transparent, inclusive, and responsible governance of these forests, which are key to the sustainable development of signatory countries. We would like to recall that in Africa, the Miombo woodlands are the major tropical forests, which are indeed essential for carbon sink. Mozambique has hosted the SADC ministerial meeting of SADC in September, which adopted the Maputo Declaration on SADC early warning and early action, essential in the impact-based response, demonstrating the individual and collective commitment of member states to defend nature and reduce the disaster risks arising from climate change. We have launched the presidential initiative, One District, One Meteorological Station, by installing modern weather stations to gather effective early warning data for early action that makes communities resilient and less vulnerable to extreme weather events. We are the host of the SADC Emergency and Humanitarian Operations Center since 2021 in Nakala to coordinate emergency response in Southern Africa with the support and collaboration of bilateral and multilateral development partners and civil society, avoiding the loss of life and disaster damage. We therefore call on, once again, international and local partners, both public and private, to mobilize financial and technological resources to restore and conserve the mangroves and the rich biodiversity in Mozambique and in the world at large. Ladies and gentlemen, talking about transition, energy transition towards a fair energy transition is an exercise of social inclusion. It must be gradual and should reduce the negative impact on the economic development of the country as it happened in the countries that are developed today. So we want to continue in the medium term using our natural resources such as natural gas that is less polluting and generates finance for adaptation actions and climate change. We are working in the development and adaptation. As for the carbon market, we call on climate finance providers to make disbursement in a balanced and satisfactory way to enable implementation of more effective mitigation adaptation initiatives. I conclude by inviting everyone to protect the climate system for mitigation and adaptation under the Paris Agreement by providing means to protect communities, ecosystems, and build capital from the impacts of climate change for the good of present and future generations. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Taneti Mau, President of Kiribati. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I begin by sharing the peace and blessings of the Almighty and the warm greetings of the government and the people of Kiribati. Mr. President, I acknowledge the government and the people of Egypt for the warm hospitality and commend the exceptional leadership in hosting this action-oriented COP27. It is indeed a critical time for us to be more ambitious in the implementation of the Paris Agreement with solutions premised on bolstering the resilience of our peoples against the adverse impacts of climate change. It has been 30 years since the inception of the UNFCCC, and despite the science, some continue to block ambitious actions that could curb global emissions and develop effective solutions to address climate change impacts. Consequently, for frontline countries like Kiribati, this would be detrimental to our sovereign desire to safeguard our people. Climate change is happening, and loss and damage is very real. Yet, the major solutions that we talk about remain distant, as we are at the mercy of multilateral implementing agencies who continue to determine how we adapt and access financial resources. So disheartening. Nevertheless, we remain hopeful that our collective efforts and partnership will address these concerns. We need data, capacity building, and technology transfer, and country-specific science projections to make our adaptation planning much more effective. Mr. President, this year, Guinea-Bissau declared a state of disaster to manage and respond to the impact of severe drought, with some of our highlands frequently inundated by storm surges. The impact of extreme spring tides continues to be a threat to our economy, our future developments, and destroying the very fabrics of our livelihoods. Despite these challenges, Mr. President, our commitment to building resilience is driven by the desire of the people to remain living in Guinea-Bissau. We will continue to strengthen our legislative and policy frameworks, including the recently enhanced nationally determined contributions. Costs of maintaining our livelihoods in the face of climate change already exceeds our means. Yet, it does not dampen our resolve to put resources where we can. This is compounded by COVID-19, coupled with the inflation on commodities, including fuel. The government will continue to invest in building resilience through people-centered approach and social protection programs. Mr. President, I appeal to my fellow leaders to stand in solidarity together to fight this climate dilemma for the brighter and resilient future of our young generation. We must be held accountable to our climate finance commitments and achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius to save our shared home. Action begins here and now before it is too late. The Mauritania or the Tabamore, meaning health, peace, and prosperity upon us all. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. William K. Ruto, President of Kenya, speaking on behalf of the African Group. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we come together for the 27th annual climate meeting 30 years after the adoption of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, 25 years since we adopted the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, and 7 years following yet another historic milestone, the Paris Agreement adopted in 2015. When the convention was adopted in 1992, global emissions were approximately 27 gigatons annually. This has risen to about 40 gigatons, while carbon dioxide accumulation in the atmosphere has also steadily increased. For the past 8 consecutive years, documented by the UN to be the hottest years in recorded history, each new year has been hotter than the previous year. The whole world is reeling from the staggering impact of climate change. The spread, scale, and frequency of disasters like hurricanes, typhoons, wildfires, and heat waves, melting sea ice and glaciers, droughts and desertification, floods and rising sea levels in numerous regions of all continents
indicate that humanity is confronting unprecedented devastation on a global scale. The state of climate in Africa reports lay it bare. High water stress is estimated to affect about 250 million people in Africa and is expected to displace up to 700 million people by 2030. In the past 50 years, drought-related hazards have claimed the lives of over 500,000 people and led to economic losses of over $70 billion in the region. More than 1,000 flood-related disasters were reported involving more than 20,000 deaths in Africa alone over this period. It is estimated that by 2050, climate impacts could cost African nations $50 billion annually. The Horn of Africa region, including Kenya, is experiencing the worst drought in 40 years. 2 consecutive years without rain have visited misery on millions of people. 2.5 million livestock have died in Kenya this year alone, causing economic losses of more than $1.5 billion. 2 days ago, we went to distribute food relief to 4.3 million affected Kenyans in an emergency program that has forced us to reallocate funds budgeted for education and health. The trade-offs we are forced to make between indispensable public goods is evident that climate change is directly threatening our people's lives, health, and future. Moreover, due to drought, many children have now dropped out of school. We have been compelled to make school feeding a priority in order to keep our children in class. Kenya's world-renowned wildlife heritage has not been spared either, and carcasses of elephants, zebras, wildebeest, and many other wild fauna litter our parks. We have had to spend $3 million to supply feed and water to wildlife in the last 3 months. Again, this backdrop, the lengthy discussions at COPs with its stalling, delaying tactics and procrastination that have hampered implementation and delivery is simply cruel and unjust. We cannot afford to spend more time skirting around the real issues, and we must break out of the open-ended, process-focused discussions we are trapped in. Further delay will make us busy spectators as calamity wipes out lives and livelihoods. As we speak, Mr. Chairman, the pledge made 13 years ago in Copenhagen, committing $100 billion annually, remains unfulfilled. Such a gracious and unexplained default is a major cause of persisting distrust, and neither is there any sound reason for the continuing pollution. In stark contrast, Kenya, a country with far less resources than the average developed country, has foregone pollution industrialization and growth opportunities and intentionally invested in green energy. It must be recalled that Kenya has tremendous hydrocarbon and coal deposits which could go a long way in fueling the engines of our development. Nevertheless, due to resolute commitment, our electricity grid is 93% green. This morning, we signed a framework agreement for collaboration on the development of sustainable green industries in Kenya with an investor to produce 30 gigawatts of green hydrogen in Kenya. There exists opportunities in Kenya to produce 20 gigawatts of wind power, 10 gigawatts of geothermal electricity, and being at the equator, considerable amount of solar energy. Green energy production opportunities are vast in Kenya and throughout Africa. In the East Africa alone, for example, there exists sufficient hydroelectric potential to produce 100,000 megawatts, and if properly exploited, could generate enough clean energy for the whole of the continent. Instead of struggling to power industrialization using dirty energy, which is costly and destroying our planet, we want to make a case for developed economies to decarbonize their production by directing industrial investments to Africa and making use of clean energy to manufacture for the whole world. COP26 established the Glasgow Dialogue to formulate funding arrangements for measures to prevent, mitigate, and remedy loss and damage associated with adverse effects of climate change. Loss and damage is not an abstract topic of endless dialogue. It is our daily experience and the living nightmare of millions of Kenyans and hundreds of millions of Africans. A phenomenon of rising water levels in Rift Valley lakes was experienced in Kenya in 2020 and generated humanitarian crisis of unprecedented levels. Approximately 75,000 households were displaced in 13 counties, with a total population of 379,000 requiring urgent humanitarian assistance. The affected communities endured disruption for their livelihoods, losing homes, grazing lands, and farming fields, while social amenities like schools, health facilities, markets, fish landings, and processing facilities, once thriving hotels, curio shops, resorts, and lodges, electricity lines, and water supply and sanitation units were swallowed by water bodies. Loss and damage must therefore be addressed with a level of seriousness which demonstrates fairness, urgency, and consideration. Africa contributes less than 3% of the pollution responsible for climate change, but is most severely impacted by the ensuing crisis. Africa, and it is therefore only fair and proper that this conference takes necessary measures to recognize Africa's special needs and circumstances under the Paris Agreement, in line with the Convention and relevant decisions adopted by previous COPs. Beyond the overdue, legitimate, and priority concerns of resilience, mitigation, loss, and damage, Africa offers unique potential to play an indispensable positive role in the planet's climate change future. Africa's vast tracts of land, deep treasures of diverse natural resources, tremendous untapped renewable energy potential, and a youthful, dynamic, and skilled workforce constitute the continent's irresistible credentials. Properly deployed, these assets could be crucial in driving global mitigation efforts while creating new economic opportunities in the continent. I am convinced of the need to more comprehensively showcase the opportunities that abound in Africa, such as green energy, smart agriculture, decarbonized manufacturing, e-mobility, and green building, all aimed at the attainment of zero carbon by 2050. As the coordinator of the Committee of African Heads of State and Governments on Climate Change, I therefore plan to convene a continental summit focusing on climate action next year. Accordingly, you are all invited to take part in Africa's march to sustainable economic transformation and green growth. Kenya's next significant export will be carbon credits. This is why we call for simplified, more transparent carbon market systems that directly benefit communities and not just intermediaries. Back home, I just launched an ambitious project to increase the national tree cover from the current 12% to 30% in 10 years. We intend to accomplish this by first growing 15 billion trees on approximately 10.6 million hectares of land throughout the country at an estimated cost of US dollars 500 million. In conclusion, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the face of impending catastrophe, whose warning signs are already unbearably disastrous, weak action is unwise. No action is dangerous. At this point, in the progression of this calamity, we have few choices and little time. Our discourse must focus on delivery, and our conversation must be centered on our commitments and implementation. I call on every delegate here today to rise to the challenge of this moment, to make difficult but necessary decisions and seize transformative opportunity from the grasp of climate disaster. This means honoring spending commitments for mitigation and adaptation and mobilizing increased financial flows to those affected, especially in Africa. By keeping our promises and being bound by our word, we will demonstrate to people across the globe
future of small island developing states like the Kingdom of Tonga. My kingdom is the third most vulnerable country in the world to the adverse effects of climate change. As a people, we share a deep connection to the ocean. As with many other Pacific Island countries, Tonga is heavily dependent upon its fisheries and ocean resources for food, transport, economic development, and culture. Historically, the Tongan people have always shown resilience in the face of such natural disasters. However, the record rates of increased coastal erosion, ocean acidification, the loss of coral reefs, coupled with ever-present rising sea levels, 3 times higher than the global average. Our ability to respond to the increasing multiplicity of disasters and the increasing severity and intensity of extreme weather patterns is now undermined. On the 15th of January this year, Tonga experienced a volcanic explosion equal to none in our living history. Homes were destroyed, lives were lost, and entire communities are deeply traumatized by sonic explosions and the resulting tsunami waves. Population displacement has now become a permanent feature for my people. In the aftermath of the explosion, we experienced the care, compassion, and support of the global community and our neighboring countries in response and recovery efforts. Mr. President, I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you who have made a contribution to the recovery efforts of my people. I acknowledge your kindness and the compassion shown towards the people of the Kingdom of Tonga. Please allow me to highlight 2 key future challenges resulting from this unprecedented volcanic explosion. The first is our access to clean, safe drinking water. The pollution of rainwater in the aftermath of the explosion highlighted the vulnerability of water storage sites in the outer islands. This urgent reality places greater importance on the access to available water desalination technologies that can operate on renewable energy. The second challenge as an ocean state is to offer affordable transportation that does not add to our greenhouse gas emissions. Our culture and history as people of the ocean has taught us to live in harmony with our environment. In the near future, we will need to reacquaint our people with such livelihoods and use cutting-edge technologies that promote wind-powered, low-carbon emitting modes of transport. As small island developing states, we cannot face the challenges presented to all of us alone. We are firmly committed to international goals. In 2020, the Government of Tonga submitted its second nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement, setting ambitious mitigation and adoption goals. In addition, Tonga's long-term low-emission development strategy sets targets in sectors including energy, transport, waste management, and the resettlement of communities. Global objectives must be directly translated into our mission and journey, charting a pathway for a resilient, sustainable, and inclusive future for Tonga. Such goals and measures also support the implementation of the Tonga climate change policy from 2016 and uphold the overarching goal of a climate change resilient Tonga by 2035. For small island developing states like Tonga, adoption to climate change generates larger benefits when delivered in conjunction with other development activities such as disaster risk reduction and community-based approaches to development. My kingdom shares the concerns of other countries in the Pacific Islands Forum. In solidarity, we endorsed the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent that highlights the challenges that we face as a region and symbolizes our drive to respond to our ever-changing environment. As the impacts of climate change are intergenerational and our actions and decisions today will have a major bearing on the future of our people, I'm encouraged by the agendas at COP27 over the coming days. I hope that all of us here present will be inspired, motivated, and driven into action on firm commitments a sense of shared responsibility, and connection with the global community. This will be a testament to the genuine partnerships of all parties in raising ambitions and actions towards achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. May we always keep in mind the impacts of our decisions and actions here at COP27 as we chart our course towards a successful, prosperous, and sustainable future. A future where the well-being, survival, and peace of future generations are their inheritance. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Agius Levites, President of Latvia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I thank Egypt and President Sisi for hosting the COP27 meeting. The high level of attendance points to the urgent need for this gathering. The effects of climate change are felt throughout the world. For example, in Somalia, more frequent drought has led to famine. In Pakistan, melting glaciers have caused flooding of a third of the country's territory. From Greece to Australia to US, extreme temperatures cause extensive wildfires. In Latvia, in my country, climate change is decreasing biological diversity. To make matters worse, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine directly impacts food and energy security, the environment, and distracts attention and resources from climate actions. Geographical location, income level, and gender matters. It is our duty to protect and empower the communities most vulnerable and least responsible for climate change. The current energy crisis caused by Russia's war against Ukraine is another wake-up call that we need to speed up transition to renewable energy. Green solutions not only contribute to the mitigation efforts, but also ensure greater energy security. In Latvia, we are diversifying our energy mix by accelerating wind energy projects. We are determined to reach climate neutrality by 2050. Latvia is committed to the European Union's target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% until 2030. At a local level, two large Latvian cities, Riga and Liepāja, aim to be among the first 100 climate-neutral cities in Europe by 2030. Collective problems need collective solutions, and these solutions must be based on just transition. Just transition is a key word of this conference. Effective climate governance requires close cooperation between government, business, the scientific community, and civil society, especially civil society. In Latvia, too, we are determined to further improve our climate governance mechanism. Mr. President, COP27 should be aimed at bridging our differences in mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and climate finance. Delay in the mitigation efforts will only increase the need for adaptation measures and financial resources. The outcome of Sharm el-Sheikh must be an ambitious, comprehensive global response to climate change. As Secretary General Guterres already said, the world needs a pact between developed, emerging, and developing economies in order to save our planet. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Gustavo Francisco Pedro Urrego, President of Colombia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Señor Secretario Ejecutivo de la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre el Cambio Climático, Simon Still, Presidente de la República Árabe de Egipto, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, excelentísimos jefes de Estado, majestades, primeros ministros, medios de comunicación y en general a toda la ciudadanía. La ciencia ha hablado. La crisis climática es el principal problema de la humanidad. Puede acabar y tiene ese potencial la vida en el planeta y la existencia de
leadership from the first COP to date has failed in terms of stopping the causes of climate change. Increasingly, we are consuming coal, gas, oil. Indeed, the time that we would have had available to us to plan some sort of solution, we have used that with geopolitics, wars, rather than saving humanity. Political leadership has failed, basically because overcoming climate crises mean that we have to stop consuming oil and coal. And this no longer consuming means an absolute sea change in our approach to the economy. We need to ensure that people don't have vested interests in this sort of economy, a change, a shift in the global economy. And of course, this is something that political leadership has to keep up with. Year in, year out, we tread slowly to the end. As regards Colombia, a decalogue. It's something that I would like to make as a proposal, both for humanity, governments. COP is not giving us the answer, and I think time has run short. Global conferences between governments should be ensuring that policy is really heading us towards decarbonization. Decarbonization is a massive changing the dominant economy. I think we now have to say it is time for humanity, not for markets. This would be the decalogue that we propose. First of all, number one, if global policies aren't able to get us out of this problem, then humanity disappears. The extinction that's ahead of us should press us into action now. We are, after all, human beings. With or without the permission of our governments, we have to act. I think the time has come for mobilization of humanity. Number two, the market is not the principal mechanism we have to overcome the crisis. It's the market, capital accumulation, that has produced this in the first place. It will never be the answer to it. Thirdly, only public global planning, multilateral in nature, will allow us to shift from a global towards a decarbonized economy. The UN should be really the focal point for such a planning. Fourthly, global politics and global policy mobilizing humanity will set us back on course. so that we won't be influenced by the vested interests of the carbon companies, in other words, the companies, the oil companies, the gas companies, and others. 5, we have to keep in place the pillars of the planet. First of all, the Amazon jungle. It's one of those pillars of the 4 that we have. Colombia will be giving $200 million on an annual basis during 20 years to save the Amazon in its territory. And we look forward to global contributions. 6thly, the climate crisis will only be overcome if we stop consuming fossil fuels. The time has come to devalue the hydrocarbon economy, and we need dates for that. We need clear timelines as we move to an end of this, and we need to be really focused on the carbon-free economy. The solution would be a world without oil, without carbon. 7thly, the WTO treaties, as well as the IMF, run against the solution that we have for the climate crisis, which is why they should be reformed, subject to the COP agreements rather than the other way around. While we stick to the current WTO treaties, we will make no progress. We will simply go back in terms of solving the climate crisis. We will be moving closer and closer to the end. 8thly, the IMF should start a debt swap program for investment in mitigation and adaptation in all developing countries. The economic blockade policies, either they don't favor democracy and simply thwart humanity in its interests. 9thly, private multilateral banks globally have to stop funding the fossil fuel industry. And 10, immediately, we have to start peace negotiations. War is simply robbing us of vital time as humankind if we are to avoid extinction. So that's the decalogue that we propose from Colombia, so that we can act in our world and hopefully save our planet and avoid the extinction of humankind. Many thanks.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, President of the Republic of Zambia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Abdel Sisi, President of the Republic of Egypt, Arab Republic of Egypt, Your Excellencies, fellow heads of state and government, United Nations Secretary General, Your Excellency, Mr. Simon Steele, Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, first, it's our duty to congratulate the Egyptian President, President Sisi, for hosting this COP27 conference, and also to thank the Egyptian people for your warm hospitality since we arrived here. President, distinguished delegates, with the African continent being host to this COP27 on a continent which is most affected by climate change, obviously together with other least developed countries, and it's befitting to call this the African yet global COP27, because it is opportune for us to say things that we probably have not said before. Now that the conference COP27 is happening on our continent, a continent that is bearing quite a lot of the brunt of the climate change, yet it contributes the least to climate damage, we expect that this COP27 will address some of our key issues that are arising from the climate change negative effect. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, our government's home in Zambia has demonstrated a marked commitment to combat climate change in line with the requirements of the Paris Agreement. However, in order for us to be able to maximize on our contributions to ameliorating the negative effects of climate change, and yet at the same time meeting our people's minimum requirements to maintain their livelihoods, we need strong and enduring international partnership and support which deliver on its commitments. I think the key word here is to deliver on our commitments, the commitments of us, of course, the commitments of our partners. As chair of the African Group of Negotiators, Zambia has submitted an ambitious, revised, and updated nationally determined contribution as required by the Paris Agreement. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, climate change adaptation remains a top priority for all of us without exception. Therefore, we expect that COP27 will deliver a milestone outcome in advancing the work program of the global goal on adaptation that we adopted in COP26 last year in Glasgow. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, while we continue to urge for the world to increase its commitment and, more importantly, delivery towards climate change, Zambia will continue to do what it's able to do in its own right, given its resource constraints. We have identified a number of mitigation actions as a means of attaining our aspirations and increasing our commitment. We continue to formulate green growth strategies which will provide a framework for transforming the country into a climate-smart green economy. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, we call on all our esteemed partners to fulfill their pledge of $100 billion per year of funding for us all to meet our intended goals around this challenge, climate change. This is a very important motivation for us all to continue with our climate change mitigation efforts, in addition to, honestly speaking, to making this contribution, commitment, obligation met as a measure of credibility. If we don't meet our commitments, we make the various commitments, we don't meet them, obviously our credibility as individual countries, but also as a group of nations, a League of Nations, global League of Nations, is at question. And I believe that we'll address this issue after this COP27. We have an obligation and a noble task to deliver for the future generations, for our planet, especially that we are meeting here once more on the African continent. As we conclude, Mr. President, fellow delegates, there are times when we as individual countries have a decision to support or not to support certain commitments. In this particular case, I'm afraid to say that option to decide not to does not exist, is not available to any one of us. It is important, therefore, for us to accept and understand that a crisis like this one should not divide us, should not move us away from each other. It does not matter what discussions we're having individually in our countries. It does not matter what issues face us as regions, as continents, but also as a global community. We have an obligation to work together and cooperate even more than ever before. And this way is the most assured way of defeating the negative effects of climate change. As I said, let us come out of this COP27 more united and work together in many spheres, including joint investments, trading, making carbon trading as is possible. And we shouldn't leave the ascension steps to carbon trading, for example, to individual states. Let's work out a template on how to engage in carbon trade much easier, including working on the regulations that affect this important revenue-based activity, which will help us ameliorate the negative effects of climate change. Mr. President, distinguished guests, a lot has been said. I choose to say these few words and ask all of us to rededicate our efforts and, more important, accelerate implementation of mitigation factors. All of us, without exception. I thank you for your kindest attention. Merci beaucoup.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Ismail Omar Guelleh, President of Djibouti. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Your Excellency, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of the Arab Republic of Egypt and President of COP27, heads of state and government, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, may I be permitted to thank the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, His Excellency Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and the people of Egypt for the warm welcome that has been reserved for us since our arrival in this beautiful city of Sharm el-Sheikh. Our gratitude also goes out to the new Executive Secretary of the Convention, Mr. Simon Stiel, who has taken all necessary steps in order to fully facilitate our work throughout this conference. And finally, I would like to add my voice to those words of the President speaking on behalf of Africa and the President of Argentina on behalf of the G7 plus China group. President, the world today faces a number of challenges, amongst them climate change, but also the loss of biodiversity, air pollution, pollution of water and soil. The most threatening and urgent, without doubt, is global warming, which threatens survival of humanity. This is proven again and again by numerous catastrophes, turning our populations into victims. This is all the more a sad situation as our summits and decisions, our commitments and actions remain insufficient, lower than the level of mobilization needed. More than this, greenhouse gas emissions continue to be increasingly emitted with horrific consequences. Africa made only a marginal contribution to global warming. However, it is fundamentally affected by this phenomenon. As concerns the Republic of Djibouti, by its geographical location in its intertropical arid environment, Djibouti is particularly vulnerable to the risks created by climate change, such as floods, droughts, and rising sea levels. These risks lead to rarefied water resources, soil erosion, and damage to infrastructure. The impacts of these risks are particularly harmful for the water, agriculture, and public health sectors of my country. And this is why we have implemented a water supply project connecting Ethiopia with Djibouti and a desalination project for seawater for our capital, a key economic and demographic issue to better tackle the challenges of the climate and to ensure greater resilience of the urban population, ensuring that they have safe access to water. Djibouti has built a number of different dams in order to protect our population and our infrastructure from floods. In our national determined contributions, Djibouti assumed the obligation to reduce its CO2 emissions by 40% by 2030 compared to the reference scenario. To do this, we have put into place an electrical interconnection network with Ethiopia, which has allowed us to annually reduce by more than 150 kilotons CO2 emissions of our country, and we have initiated a number of geothermic wind and solar energy projects in order to significantly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. As another part of our contribution to the fight against climate change, just over a week ago, Djibouti organized a global summit on research into the climate, which has allowed researchers from various countries to exchange on issues related to climate change. It is in this spirit that we created a regional observatory on climate change, which will allow African researchers to contribute to our better understanding of the collapse of our climate. Given the numerous non-binding commitments, Mr. President, we are not surprised of the lack of progress achieved. This is why we recall that as the COP27 adopts binding decisions recognizing the needs and actual specific circumstances of Africa, more progress will be achieved. We call for access to additional predictable funding. This is fundamental to implement actions for mitigation and adaptation. Therefore, we urge developed countries to comply with their commitments to mobilize $100 billion every year. Finally, we demand that 50% of this funding be dedicated to adaptation. It is time to move from words to action by reducing drastically greenhouse gas emissions and mobilizing the funds that are needed to shore up the resilience of populations as they face climate change. I thank you for your kind attention.
Welcome. I thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. It's now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Bazoum Mohamed, President of Niger. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, to consolidate what we agreed in Glasgow, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published 2 reports this year. In these reports, they warn us that current commitments for reductions of greenhouse gas emissions will lead, between now and the end of the century, global warming 2 times greater than that as set forth in the Paris agreements. It is this warning that means that to avoid catastrophic, predictable loss and damage, it is urgent that we accelerate our reductions of greenhouse gas emissions whilst also respecting justice and equality. We know that Africa is the continent most vulnerable on our planet. It is therefore of imperative importance that COP27 rises to this occasion on the climate and places specific attention on those local specific needs. And the concerns of the African continent are as follows. 1, the definition of a new collective quantified goal for climate funding that takes into account the needs of developing countries. 2, a clear definition of the mechanisms that will be used by developed countries in order that they comply with their commitment to annually double adaptation funds between now and 2025. 3rd, handling loss and damage through the establishment of a governance body with precise funding arrangements. 4, the commitment of key emitter countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to stay at 1.5 degrees. 5, a fair, inclusive and equitable energy transition. Such a transition should allow Africa to enjoy its energy resources, notably fossil fuels, a sine qua non precondition for facilitating its sustainable development and eradicating poverty in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, within Africa, the Sahel is certainly the region that presents the greatest vulnerability and deserves a separate treatment in light of the specific challenges it faces. This includes security, climate, migratory, health, food, and demographic challenges. We can never say this enough. The violence that is ravaging the Sahel today is deeply linked to the climate disaster suffered by this region. And this is why Niger welcomes regional initiatives which have been taken to mitigate the impacts of climate change, such as the Great Green Wall and the Climate Commission for the Sahel region. These initiatives aim at contributing to greater food security and preserving biodiversity, as well as preserving the natural capital, which will allow a better adaptation and greater resilience of both populations and ecosystems. Niger welcomes the creation of the Sahel Climate Fund, an innovative, adapted fund to fund actions on the climate for regular, consistent technical support for the stakeholders in the region of the Sahel who have difficulty gaining access to resources from multilateral mechanisms due to the complex procedures. The first 5-year funding cycle should mobilize $2 billion, contributing to the Great Green Wall initiative through actions which promote, inter alia, increasing food security, developing the potential for renewable energy, as well as human capital and development for green jobs. The promises of funding for adaptation from one conference after another are vitally important. Between conception and implementation, there is a gap, many a slip betwixt cup and lip. And this is why we need to define clear rules urgently for the implementation of the obligations that have been assumed. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Milo Djukanovic, President of Montenegro.
Your Excellencies, I have the honor of addressing you on behalf of Montenegro. I would like to express gratitude to President El-Sisi and the Egyptian government for excellent organization. We are facing the key decade for transformation and transition, as the Egyptian presidency properly diagnosed, from negotiations and planning to implementation. In Glasgow, we clearly said we had to speed up the efforts, upgrade support, and strengthen resilience. Latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel confirmed that global political leadership would not be decisive for success if there is no determined multilateral action from all levels of social, economic, and technological system. Your Excellencies, the only way to achieve the Paris goal is to ensure simultaneous implementation and increase of climate ambition. Through the revision of its nationally determined contribution, Montenegro set the target of reducing emissions by 35% by 2030. In the Glasgow summit, Montenegro stepped up the ambition to 40% of emissions reduction, convinced that such a goal is achievable given the measures defined in the key national strategic and development plans. Activities of the new revision are in progress. Roadmap for implementation has been developed, as well as the scheme for monitoring and evaluating progress. Inventory of greenhouse gases emissions is updated in line with the new methodology of Intergovernmental Panel. Latest calculations indicate to potential further reduction of the emissions level of 45%, which has a realistic basis, but the challenges are strong and very expensive, particularly in the energy and agriculture, given the negative effects of the pandemic and global disturbances caused by the aggression against Ukraine. In addition to this, the lasting domestic political instability hinders the focus on development issues and a continuous upgrading of capacities for planning and implementing climate policy and its incorporation in all sectors, which would otherwise create preconditions for gradual reduction in the use of coal, long-term low-carbon development, and climate neutrality as the final goal. In spite of the small share in global emissions, Montenegro must continue undertaking all the required steps to comply with international commitments. We see green transformation as an opportunity to start the period of a dynamic and sustainable development that will guarantee growth of economic activities and thus also of the standard of living. Our greatest challenge will be to ensure just transition. That is why support of development and financial partners and a stronger inflow of foreign investment from technologically most advanced countries remain necessary. Your Excellencies, are we ready to speed up the climate action in the decisive decade and save the planet? We seem not to have any choice. Responsibility for the implementation of the promised and the accepted lies on all of us. It does not lie only on the global political leadership and partnership between the developed world and developing countries. It does not lie only on the urgency of concerted and climate-wise responsible action of the governments, investors, and business sectors. It lies on every citizen individually. We all can and must contribute to the Paris Accord goals becoming our reality. The time is running out, and the challenges and problems we face are becoming increasingly complex. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Rashad Mohammed Ali Al-Alimi, President of Yemen. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Your Excellency, President, ladies and gentlemen, peace be upon you all. I would like, first of all, to express my sincere appreciation and heartfelt wishes for Egypt, commending the excellent organization of this high-level summit. I would like also to thank the United Nations and its Secretary General for their efforts with the various stakeholders in favor of our planet. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, our nations convene today amidst a multiplicity of challenges, from the food crisis to a record increase in temperature to wars in various parts of the world. But we are cognizant that the repercussions of climate change remains the highest item on the agenda and challenge for countries in armed conflict. And although Yemen is the least responsible for emissions that are responsible for climate change, it still is one of the most affected countries by the negative impact of climate change. And the somber picture that is depicted in the various reports about the impact of climate change in Yemen will be even more detailed during the expansive deliberations and proceedings of this summit. But allow me here to indicate the following. Some inklings of that somber picture, which includes the depletion of water sources, including groundwater, and the increase of the sea levels in the coastal areas of the country, which extend for more than 2,400 kilometers, which consists in a real life risk and danger for the inhabitants and a problem for the economy. Our country has always been under the scourge of the threat of drought and thirst, which leads to armed confrontations. And 72% of the population rely on agricultural activity, which is becoming less and less productive. And the changes linked to the increased temperatures and the disruptions in rainfall have led to quagmires due to flooding, which also lead to the death of our citizens and also the spread of diseases. Also, our tourism potential has been disastrously hit due to those changes, given that the social network has been disrupted and undermined by the militias that are sponsored by the Iranian regime. And this is why we need further pledges for building capacity to counter these phenomena and also ensure that we have clear opportunities for peacemaking based on international frameworks, particularly the Gulf Initiative and its implementation process and the outcomes of national dialogue and the Security Council resolutions on the matter, particularly the resolution 2216. Ladies and gentlemen, we at the state and the government in Yemen, we are fully aware of the severe repercussions of climate change, and we are similarly cognizant of our responsibilities that are common in order to address those challenges. And we understand that you know very well what are the main guaranteed pathways to achieve progress in this regard. It is the pathway of peace and ending the toppling of regimes and working within the UN and making sure that we receive our fair share of development financing that goes in the direction of the least developed countries. And we will also need to work against the plans of the terrorist militias trying to turn our country into the largest landmine field since World War II. And also, we need to be countering the targeting of the oil reserve Safer area. And here, we would like to indicate that our responsibilities are overlapping in supporting the Yemeni government in capacity building and reconstructing its institutions despite the threats of terrorist militias that are supported by the Iranian regime against the stability of the country, and we need to be securing the navigation and seafaring pathways. As you know, we have gone a long way in working with and in favor of peacemaking efforts in order to alleviate the suffering of our people and bring back Yemen as a constructive player in its region and the world. But the terrorist militias have always been there working against our peace efforts and undermining the stability and the navigation and sea infrastructure in Hadramaut and Shabwa, and expanding their attacks across the borders in a region that is at the heart of, at the crossroads of trade routes in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the decisions that you will make during the next 2 weeks will have a serious impact on the lives of Yemenis who've lost about $126 billion, which is the equivalent of 50% of its GDP over the past 8 years. This is in addition to the increasingly crowded camps for persons who have seen their lives destroyed by the ongoing situation. We'd like to commend the support of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates for their appreciated efforts in alleviating this disaster and making sure that there isn't a full collapse of our institutions, such institutions that are working with you in trying to alleviate the effects of climate change at every level. We'd like to also reiterate on this occasion our appreciation for regional and global initiatives in this regard, particularly the Middle East Green Initiative that has been announced by the brotherly Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in order to reach record reductions of carbon emissions. We also support the Adaptation and Resilience Initiative launched by Egypt. Ladies and gentlemen, the human civilization knows Yemen and is now called upon by Yemen to respond to the calls of our mothers and our fathers and our people who look forward to a bright future and for our civilization to be protected from efforts to destroy it. And this is why I am here with you, trying to ask you for a fast mechanism to rebuild Yemen and its infrastructure and protect its biodiversity and its environmental resources and bring back life to its ecosystems. We would like to thank you again, brother President of Egypt, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and we look forward to this summit coming away with constructive solutions and resolutions. And we express our support of the presidency of Egypt in this COP27. And we also look forward to the support of the United Arab Emirates, to our support to the UAE in its organization of COP28. And we also reiterate our support for the Egyptian president's call for working together to end the war in Ukraine. We support that call because we know what is war and what are the severe repercussions of war and conflict wherever we may be. Thank you, and peace be upon you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
When Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II addressed COP26 last year, she reflected how history has shown that when nations come together in common cause, there is always room for hope. I believe we found room for hope in Glasgow, with one last chance to create a plan that would limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. We made the promises to keep that goal within reach. And the question today is this: can we summon the collective will to deliver them? I believe we can. When we began our COP presidency, just 1/3 of the global economy was signed up to net zero. Today, it is 90%. And for our part, the UK, which was the first major economy in the world to legislate for net zero, will fulfill our ambitious commitment to reduce emissions by at least 68% by 2030. And because there is no solution to climate change without protecting and restoring nature, in Glasgow, more than 140 countries, which are home to over 90% of the world's forests, made a historic promise to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by the end of this decade. And just this afternoon, I co-hosted the first meeting of the Forests and Climate Leaders Partnership to ensure this is delivered. Central to all our efforts is honouring our promises on climate finance. I know that for many, finances are tough right now. The pandemic all but broke the global economy. And before coming here today, I spent last week working on the difficult decisions needed to ensure confidence and economic stability in my own country. But I can tell you today that the United Kingdom is delivering on our commitment of £11.6 billion. And as part of this, we will now triple our funding on adaptation to £1.5 billion by 2025. But let me tell you why. First, I profoundly believe it is the right thing to do. Listen to Prime Minister Motley of Barbados as she describes the existential threat posed by the ravages of climate change. Or look at the devastating floods in Pakistan, where the area underwater is the same size as the entire United Kingdom. When you see 33 million people displaced, with disease rife and spreading through the water, you know it is morally right to honour our promises. But it is also economically right too. Climate security goes hand in hand with energy security. Putin's abhorrent war in Ukraine and rising energy prices across the world are not a reason to go slow on climate change. They are a reason to act faster. Because diversifying our energy supplies by investing in renewables is precisely the way to ensure ourselves against the risks of energy dependency. It is also a fantastic source of new jobs and growth. In Glasgow, we began an approach globally, using aid funding to unlock billions of pounds of private finance for the development of new green infrastructure. So instead of developing countries being unfairly burdened with the carbon debt of richer nations and somehow expected to forego that same path to growth, we are helping those countries deliver their own fast track to clean growth. And the UK is making further commitments to support this today, including by investing £65 million in a range of green investment projects in Kenya and in Egypt. I'd like to pay tribute to President Sisi for his leadership in bringing us all together, and to thank the UK's President of COP26, Alok Sharma, for his inspiring work to deliver on the Paris Agreement and Glasgow Climate Pact. By honouring the promises we made in Glasgow, and by directing public and private finance towards the protection of our planet, we can turn our struggle against climate change into a global mission for new jobs and clean growth. And we can bequeath our children a greener planet and a more prosperous future. That's a legacy we could be proud of. So as we come together once again in common cause today, there really is room for hope. Together, let us fulfill it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Warren Kachaturian, President of Armenia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Gratitude to the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, His Excellency Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and the government of Egypt for an excellent organization of this conference.
Mr. Chairman, combating climate change is important part of the international agenda, and it requires everyone's joint approach. As a developing country, Armenia has always expressed its consent to further integrate into the global processes for combating climate change, not only by declaring an ambitious climate agenda, but also by transmitting to a more sustainable, resilient, and low-carbon economic system. Climate change is happening even faster than it was estimated before, from most advanced to the less developed countries, to small islands, to mountainous landlocked countries like Armenia. All the humanity is not only witnessing this change, but is also impacted by it. Ecosystems are at risk, water resources are running out, floods, storms, forest fires, cases of heat and drought are becoming more frequent. With its vulnerable mountainous ecosystem, Armenia has already faced the negative consequences of climate change. Our country has recorded 1.3 degree increase of average temperature and 9% decrease of precipitation, making it one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Mr. Chairman, we are well aware of the environment and the negative impact of wars on ecosystems and the environment. The impact of wars on ecosystems is different and depends on the duration of the war and the types of weapons that are being used. Unfortunately, recently Armenia faced such a challenge. On 13th of September, Armenia was attacked by Azerbaijan. The target was the sovereign territory of the Republic of Armenia, the eastern and southeastern cities, densely populated cities of Armenia, including the city of Jermuk, which is known to be a touristic city, were heavily shelled. Military activities in these regions were paralleled by also using drones and heavy weaponry, and it caused tangible damages to the environment, including the shelling of Gechut water reservoir that could have human costs. Dear colleagues, Mr. Chairman, despite the challenges existing in Armenia, the climate change agenda remains priority for our government. Particularly, climate resilient and low-carbon development has been recognized as priority, which is based on the sustainable and long-term climate change adaptation strategy, on investments in large-scale afforestation, renewable energy and energy-efficient sectors, application of innovative and modern climate technology, promotion of electric mobility, and development of nuclear energy. Our country is determined to fulfill its commitments under the Paris Agreement, taking into consideration the importance of joint efforts in combating climate change. Last year, Armenia submitted a strategy for the 2021-2030 nationally determined contribution of the Republic of Armenia for setting a new target for mitigating climate change at the level of the whole economy, which means 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. In this regard, innovative solutions, including Debt for Climate initiative, are of importance in a world where accumulated state debt deters most developing countries from receiving climate-related funds. We welcome the progress for establishing international rules under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the positive, although fragile achievements we had in Glasgow 1 year ago, and we expect equal and fair participation of developing countries to promote full transition of the economies of states to sustainable and carbon-neutral development. Mr. Chairman, I would like to say that if we work together, we are sufficiently strong for making change. So let's fight together for sustainable development and new green era where nature and humanity coexist in harmony. Thank you very much.
It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Borut Pahor, President of Slovenia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, I could not wish for a better platform from which to address the world for my very last time in the capacity of the President of the Republic of Slovenia. I express my sincere gratitude to Egypt for its hospitality and for its tireless efforts to make COP27 a success. Ladies and gentlemen, climate breakdown is the essential issue of our times, both globally and locally. Personally, I am deeply committed to protecting our environment with my own Standing Committee for Climate Policy, all excellent experts on their field. I regularly recommend adoption of concrete measures to the Slovenian government and the House. Colleagues and friends, the decade we live in is the critical one for stepping up climate action. Full implementation of the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Climate Pact are our way forward in staying on track with the 1.5 Celsius goal. We are experiencing combined energy and food insecurity, also due to the Russian war against Ukraine. This, however, should not come at the expense of our ambitious climate action. On the contrary, we should use the current energy crisis as an opportunity for out-of-the-box solutions for mitigating climate change. I reiterate Slovenia's ambition to reach climate neutrality by 2050 at the latest. We are preparing our first national climate law, which will further promote meeting this target. At the same time, we are well aware of the great diversity of needs of developing countries and communities. We therefore wish to substantial progress on the global goal on adaptation. We support efforts to find solutions for founding arrangements for loss and damage. We also support the call of the United Nations Secretary General to expand early warning coverage throughout the world. Excellencies, climate breakdown is increasingly a factor of instability, violence, and war. As a candidate for a non-permanent seat of the United Nations Security Council for the period of 2045-2025, Slovenia aims for integration climate action into prevention, peaceful building, and peacemaking. We are committed to solidarity. This year, we doubled our climate finance through multilateral channels in support for the least developed states and small islands developing states. Ladies and gentlemen, climate breakdown is happening here and now. We shall either stand together or fall together. We only have this one motherland. Our generation has the possibility and duty to act and leave the planet in a better shape for our children. Again, failure is not an option. We are talking of a man-made problem. We have a man-made solution for it. So let's get to work together for implementation. Mr. President, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Isaac Herzog, President of Israel. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so very honored to join you today from across the globe, so many friends at the COP27. I thank the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, His Excellency Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and his government for hosting us here in this beautiful Sharm el-Sheikh. As neighboring nations, Israel and Egypt are both fortunate to call this beautiful region, the Middle East, our home. However, this home we all love is also a global hotspot for climate change, with studies forecasting imminent severe consequences of our region. The Middle East is on the brink of catastrophe, and you could have heard it in the speeches of my predecessors. Here in Sharm el-Sheikh, I wish to reiterate the State of Israel's solid commitment, as relayed last year in Glasgow, to achieving net zero carbon emissions and to transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy by 2050. But Israel is prepared to assume far greater responsibility. Israel is prepared to lead the effort towards regional climate resilience. I intend to spearhead the development of what I term as Renewable Middle East, a regional ecosystem of sustainable peace. I envision that in the foreseeable future, the solar energy produced in the deserts of the Middle East will be available for exportation to Europe, Asia, and Africa. If, for example, Israel and Greece are already working on electricity connectors to supply green electricity from Israel to Europe, I believe that the entire Middle East, all Middle East nations, abundant with sun and technology, will have the ability to connect the rest of the world to a magnificent source of renewable energy. In a region undergoing accelerated desertification, Israel also has the capability and know-how to deflect severe water shortages and to offer solutions for food insecurity. We are eager to share all our expertise and practical tools. That is what a renewable Middle East is all about. And I invite you all to visit our beautiful pavilion here at COP27 and see some of these brilliant ideas for yourselves. Dear friends, this crisis threatens the very existence of the future which we wish for our children. It transcends politics and geographic margins, and so must we. I say to all nations at the COP27, and particularly to our neighbors near and far, this state of emergency demands we work together, not tomorrow, today. Let us turn the climate emergency into an opportunity to address 20th century conflicts, thereby advancing desperately needed 21st century collaborations. Let us leverage vital regional partnerships as a path towards inclusivity, stability, and prosperity to form this shared renewable Middle East. The Prosperity Green and Prosperity Blue Partnership reflecting Jordan's intention to supply Israel with green electricity and Israel's intention to supply Jordan with desalinated water, with the direct involvement and support of the United States of America and the United Arab Emirates, is the ultimate example of creative win-win partnerships which will contribute to the stability of the entire region. In the spirit of our hosts in the region, I would like to teach from the Quran that, as said, to be good to others as Allah has been good to us, and to not seek to corrupt the land. As said in Arabic, وَأَحْسِنْ كَمَا أَحْسَنَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ وَلَا تَبْغِي الْفَسَادَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. And as our Holy Bible says, may you work, toil, and protect the land. וَيِקَחْ أَدُونَי אלוהים את האדם ויניחהו בגן עדן לעובדה ולשומרה. Let us save the world God gave us, for we are all have been created in His image. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Umaro Sissoko Embalo, President of Guinea-Bissau. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Signor Presidente Al-Sisi.
President Al-Sisi from the Arab Republic of Egypt, heads of state and government, President of COP27, Simon Steele, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Honorable Mayor of the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, ladies and gentlemen, Guinea-Bissau is classified under the group of less developed countries and small island developing states. And our country does not contribute significantly to global emissions of greenhouse gases. But our commitment to the international community and the fight against global warming was expressed at COP26 in Glasgow, and also in our presentation of our updated nationally determined contribution in 2021. Guinea-Bissau committed itself to implementing mitigation actions corresponding to a deviation equivalent to minus 30% or more in relation to the scenario we had before by 2030, and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, profound changes must be rapidly set on course in order to close the gap between the goals defined under the Paris Agreement and current trends in the evolution of greenhouse gas emissions. Multiple COVID-19 crises and the war in Ukraine must not render the climate financing agenda unfeasible. We must come to an agreement on the implementation architecture for long-term climate financing. Ladies and gentlemen, with the new global challenges, we must increase our ambition related to mitigation of greenhouse gases, and we need to promote the other two pillars, namely financing and adaptation in order to achieve the ambitious goals of the Paris Agreement on the new climate regime and the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. Africa needs additional support for these initiatives, particularly our Africa Renewable Energy Initiative and the Africa Adaptation Initiative, the goal of which is to help to achieve their development aspirations aligned with three main goals: 100% access to sufficient, modern and renewable energy for all citizens in less developed countries by 2030. Then 100% electricity from renewable energy sources in all less developed countries by 2050. This is something that would meet all the needs of their citizens, social services, and industries. And then 100% use of energy efficiency potential throughout the value chain through full implementation of best practices by 2040. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to emphasize that our country, Guinea-Bissau, is under the highest threat from sea level rise and coastal erosion, amongst other risks that are related to climate change. And we have many extreme vulnerabilities because we're an African country, we're a less developed country, and we are a small island developing nation. But our contribution to global emissions of greenhouse gases is insignificant, as reflected in our updated nationally determined contribution. And it's crystal clear that we have this commitment to a quantifiable emission reduction goal that covers the main sectors, namely agriculture, forests, land use, energy and waste. We have to leave Sharm el-Sheikh showing solidarity and being committed to the implementation of the Paris Agreement on the new climate regime, maintaining a continuous financial engagement and commitment, particularly on the part of the largest emitting countries, so that each can do their part to ensure a healthier planet for future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I'd like to reaffirm Guinea-Bissau's commitment to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and to the implementation of the goals established under the Paris Agreement on the new climate regime. This is an essential step in the fight against climate change. We also need to progressively increase our ambition and actions at a national, subnational, and collective level in our future nationally determined contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I at the onset would like to express profound gratitude and deep appreciation to the government of the Arab Republic of Egypt for excellent conditions in organizing our today's conference. Unprecedented droughts and floods of this year across the many parts and corners of throughout the world, and particularly in Central Asia, have once again proved that climate change remains one of the most critical global challenges. Tajikistan, with its 93% of mountainous territory, is hardly vulnerable to climate change. Natural disasters associated with this process, with water-related natural disasters, annually cause hundreds of millions of dollars of damage to our national economy and in many cases cause casualties. It should be pointed out that the share of Tajikistan in the volume of greenhouse gas emissions is very small, and our country is ranked the 130s in global index, and due to the low amount of the greenhouse gas emissions, it is ranked among the countries with less effect on climate. Over 98% of electricity in Tajikistan generated from renewable resources, green energy, particularly energy we consume is generated in hydroelectric power stations, and according to this indicator, we are ranked the 6th in the world on green energy production. Meanwhile, by 2050, we intend to increase our share and implementation of the zero-waste strategy through the development of a green energy principle. The government of Tajikistan has enacted the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy to 2030 and a number of other documents facilitating Tajikistan's initiative and policy towards the green energy. Dear Mr. Chairman, water resources play a key role in the process of adaptation and resilience to climate change, as well as in mitigation of its impacts. The increase in water-related natural disasters highlights the inextricable link between water resources and climate change. Today, water resources are seriously affected by climate change. We experienced the most obvious example of this development in the rapid melting of glaciers at the global level, including the glaciers of Tajikistan, which form about 60% of the water resources of Central Asia. Over the past few decades, out of 13,000 of our glaciers, we have completely lost 1,000 because of the rapid melting. And given that Tajikistan's glaciers and other water sources form 60% of Central Asia's water resources, this process will add additional challenges for the countries of the region in terms of their water consumption plans. In this context, within the framework of the Water and Climate Coalition, we proposed to declare 2025 as the International Year of Glaciers Protection. At the same time, as part of our efforts to prepare for the United Nations Water Conference, which is scheduled to be held in March next year, 2023, under the co-chairmanship of Tajikistan and the Netherlands, we have proposed water and climate change as one of the main topics of the conference. At the second Dushanbe Conference on Water Decade, we proposed draft action agenda in the field of water, which should bring together commitments and actions within the framework of the next year's water conference. And I do strongly believe that the United Nations member states and all stakeholders will support us through their active participation and contribution, solid commitment and acceleration of their actions in an implementation of these noble objective and great responsibility. I wish all of us successful result from today's conference, and wish unity and solidarity on our way towards the next year United Nations Water Conference. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Pedro Sánchez Pérez Castejón, President of the Government of Spain. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. A point has been reached in history when we must shape our acts with care for their environmental consequences. Through ignorance or indifference, we can do massive, irreversible harm to the earth on which our life and well-being depends. These words are in the final statement of the first Earth Summit 50 years ago in Stockholm. And I think we should be startled at its relevance. 5 decades on, the world is still moving towards what the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, called a climate abyss, despite the clear diagnosis we're getting from science. Ignorance or indifference was what was mentioned in the Stockholm Declaration. The former could be used perhaps sometime as an excuse. Indifference, however, will not acquit us in the court of posterity. How can you be indifferent in the face of the tragedy that we've seen in countries such as Bangladesh, with rivers bursting their banks, millions displaced? What about the distress signals coming from entire communities in the Pacific who may well disappear? How can we be indifferent in the face of the extreme heat that we've seen? Heat waves in all of Europe and my own country, Spain, cannot stand by indifferent. Disasters such as what we're seeing in the Donania wetlands, a sanctuary of biodiversity, one of a kind. This is not acceptable, be it due to indifference or neglect. Donania is a place where we have local pressure, but also added to that, we have the impact of extreme, unprecedented drought, the salinization of the aquifers, the changes in our coastline. Combination of all these factors threaten its very existence. Only the highest level political compromise and commitment at every level can address all these challenges. Indifference is born from a conscious decision, in other words, looking the other way, averting one's gaze, as if we were to act that way, somehow we'll be immune to the imminent disaster and the devastation caused by climate change. It's vital that we shake off this lethargy and act determinedly with resolve, and young people want this. We need to have a new internationalism of progress going beyond all our borders. To govern is basically to make choices. We have made a commitment. We have elected, we've chosen life. That's why we're supporting the mobilization of large-scale private and public resources to speed up emissions reduction. It's vital that we have international governance and guarantee appropriate funding in order to address adaptation challenges and also loss and damage. Together with Senegal today, and with the support of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, we have launched the International Alliance for Drought Resilience. Spain will be contributing 5 million euros for it to become operational. We've also committed 3 million euros for the systematic observation facility of the WMO, thus supporting a UN Secretary General initiative. We'll also be contributing 2 million euros to the Santiago Network, scaling up our contribution to the Adaptation Fund with additional 20 million euros. In addition to that, we are working to comply with what was pledged. We'll be soon approving our international climate funding strategy. We've been the first country to contribute to the IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust. In short, ladies and gentlemen, actions speak louder than words. Nowadays, Spain has a coherent normative framework on the basis of which we hope to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. 30% of the state budget is devoted to combating climate change. We really are banking on renewable energies, what we call self-consumption, electrification of the transport sector, rehabilitating and ensuring better energy efficiency for our housing stock. The energy crisis caused by the war in Ukraine cannot be an excuse to delay commitments, nor to break our word. On the contrary, it should be an additional motivation to speed up the ecological transition. This is what we are defending from Spain. Also, Europe has done the same. We've had to react to a shock and replace rapidly 40% of our gas supplies, but we've also restated the need to have fresh impetus for our energy transition. Dear colleagues, we need to counter ignorance and indifference with an ambitious agenda. Literally, our lives are at stake here, ours and also that of our children. We have the moral duty to do this. We will rise to this challenge and walk along this shared path alongside the rest of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency.